Now, contrast that with the way we treat conversation in schools. We forbid students to talk out of turn. We forbid them to talk before, during, and after the hunt for knowledge. Forbid teasing, animated discussion, and repartee. And then we wonder why discipline is always falling apart in such an environment. We ignore tens of thousands of years of the desire to be in a conversation being the prime attractor for maintaining social decorum and for participating in the social contract and observing the golden rule. The threat in traditional societies was always that if you misbehaved, you would be cut out of the great conversations that humans alone possess the brains to have. You would be silenced or ostracized. But in school environments, everybody feels punished the minute they walk into the classroom because they're not allowed to talk freely. For generations, this was the most powerful social sanction you could impose on a person. Simply deny them the right to free speech. That was punishment. In fact, the American utopian experiment and our cherished First Amendment to our Constitution is precisely about guaranteeing this most important right. Tyranny occurs when the right to speak freely is removed. Yet ironically, in our schools, we encourage tyranny on the part of the teacher, and we try to put down the natural rebellion students engage in against this tyranny to recover their stolen rights. A so-called lack of discipline is usually just associated with students trying to be part of any real conversation, voicing their own views, particularly when expressing unpopular opinions. Good discipline, good school behavior, is assumed to occur when students merely parrot back what the teacher has permitted you to say and when you followed their prescribed script. We should also observe that in a hunter-gatherer society, the natural environment has not been dumbed down by reducing the landscape to just a handful of plants and animals. The natural environment is a place where people have not been dumbified by repetitive monocrop agriculture or factory work. This is something James Scott from Yale University describes in his book Seeing Like a State: How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. The environment in its natural state is so rich that there's plenty to talk about that immediately creates a so-called teachable moment. In a sufficiently complex natural environment, merely commenting on what you are seeing, talking about the weather, and commenting on the sounds and sights and smells your senses are taking in becomes a valuable education in itself. By comparison, most classrooms are entirely too dull, and it is no wonder that whatever students freely talk about is going to seem off-topic. Students in particular, and human beings in general, prefer to talk about things relevant to their concerns and survival, not the sterile and meaningless environment the school system has provided. Of course, this is hotly debated, with one camp believing that classrooms should be sterile so that students are not distracted from the message the teacher is dictating. So for my third quote from our assigned readings, I choose Bell et al.'s Environmental Psychology textbook, page 450, in the section on learning environments, where they say, quote, "Some researchers believe that classrooms should tend more toward the complex rather than the simple. Having more stimuli and opportunities for environmental exploration provides an enriched environment that facilitates learning. But others disagree, arguing that complex learning environments are distracting and make it difficult for the student to concentrate on schoolwork." Of course, classrooms serve more purposes than just learning content relevant to a specific topic. They also involve learning how to learn, learning social responsibility, and acquisition of cultural values. Different classroom environments, they say, may facilitate one of these purposes, but not the others. Working for the right fit between pupil and learning environment is probably the most desirable approach. For example, Aronson et al., 1982, quoted here. This is a view consistent with adaptation level theory as presented in Chapter 4. Because things change with time, it is important to evaluate classroom design modifications continually. The pointer back to Chapter 4, Theories of Environment Behavior Relationships and Adaptation Level Theory on page 110, is a good one because it honors the fact that for every individual, learning is different, and for each there may be an optimal level of stimulation. See, the problem is that there is no one-size-fits-all prescription for schooling. And the danger of schools is that they teach to the lowest common denominator, or they teach to the mean, the so-called average students, or they break people apart into designated groups, from so-called special education to the supposedly highly gifted, all of which stigmatizes and injure young people's ability to integrate their unique skills into society in the way that gives us all the chance for a happy, self-actualized life. Now, Jane McGonigal might argue that virtual reality now gives us the ability to customize classrooms for each individual student so that nobody has to suffer through a learning environment they don't feel comfortable in. We can customize the manufacture of minds the same way we now customize consumer products, and nobody has to feel stigmatized. But if we're going to create brick and mortar classrooms, if we're going to inevitably err in our design of a learning environment by trying to accommodate a room full of different people without trying to homogenize them, then the proper error, some would argue, would be to look at the types of environments in which the human mind evolved and create circumstances that, at least in some aspects, are analogous to those that shaped us. That's what Bernhard does in Primates in the Classroom. Bernhard, in Primates in the Classroom, analyzes the school environment from the perspective of a nervous system that was honed over millions of years on a planet where people talked all the time. Talking was the one thing our species did that set us apart from all the other animals. And on a planet in which the act of sitting still and listening to others talk uninterrupted occurred mostly at night, in dark environments around the warm glow of a campfire. This was the time of storytelling, when the elders and the wise and the most accomplished told their tales to pass on wisdom to the tribe. The bright light of day saw us on our feet, hunting and gathering in unimaginably complex environments, searching for materials to build tools and shelters, and running from predators and constantly chattering to one another. Well, no wonder students find it hard to sit still and sit quietly in a classroom in the middle of the day. So long as the sun was up, our ancestors were mostly up on their feet, and if we were sitting doing productive work like basket weaving or clothes making or sorting and chipping stones, then we were constantly moving our hands and, more importantly, constantly moving our mouths, talking with one another. Now, parents instinctively know this. We read stories to our children at bedtime just before lights out, not in the middle of the day, and we discuss our discoveries and activities around the dinner table. Otherwise, the children are too filled with life and activity. But school asks us to go against our entire history of adapting our brains and bodies to the circadian rhythms that govern our attention structures in complex and highly stimulating environments. We're demanding normal nighttime behavior, conditioned over millennia when darkness simplified our surroundings, during the hours we are most interested in active motion and exploration and communication. Is it no wonder, then, that children find it so hard to cooperate with the artificial mandate we impose on them to suspend all motion and spontaneous talking and listen to the shaman-like teacher tell stories? I did an experiment in my own classroom in the early 1990s with a group of so-called troublemaker students. I simply drew the shades, turned out the overhead lights, put an orange-red light bulb in one corner of the room looking like a campfire, and whispered greetings as the students filed into the classroom. They immediately adopted a hushed tone of their own and whispered back, "What's going on?" I whispered, "Sit down around me in a circle. I want to tell you a story." And they played the game with me. They were quiet, yet alert, excited, but in a way calm. I told them about the need to hunt and gather for information that could save our tribe from disaster, and told them that when the sun came up, we would have to get up, and explore the room for clues and solve problems. I had written the problem on the board. I said in my whisper, "And remember, to solve the problem, you have to talk to one another, because the clues are scattered throughout the room, and nobody can solve it on their own." Then I turned on the lights, and I opened the shades, and I said in a loud voice, "All right then, let's get to work. We don't have time to waste." Immediately, the classroom turned into a magical environment for treasure hunting. About a half an hour of frantic conversation, working with microscopes and dissection scopes and books and probes, milling about with high energy. I drew the shades again, turned out the lights, and went and sat back at the fire. Almost immediately, my students calmed down. They ceased what they were doing, and they gathered around me, quieting into a hush. I asked softly, "Welcome back to the cave. It's been a long day hunting and gathering. Let's talk about what you discovered and see what you brought back to camp. What did you find?" This simple but effective experiment, repeated many times with different groups, confirmed to me the notion that environment not only powerfully affects psychology, we know that, but that the school environment is usually antagonistic to normal human behavior and is thus responsible for most of the problems that teachers and parents and students all complain about. Yet almost nobody seems to do much about it. Over the years, I went further with these experiments in applied environmental psychology. I started having the students, for example, select movie soundtracks to play during certain lessons, enhancing the teachable moments by treating the classroom as if it were a landscape in a Hollywood movie, and allowing the students to feel like characters in various adventure and science fiction stories. This was, after all, a science class. By using music and visual aids, and with the students' help, an understanding of what environments their young minds and bodies wanted to be immersed in order to learn most effectively, we turned our classroom from a place of boredom, hostility, or goofiness into a place of mystery, adventure, and productive experience. We turned classrooms into spaceships. We turned the classroom into a jungle, and even a utopian biosphere called Marsville. When we couldn't make the classroom simulate the environment we wanted, we put students in front of a blue screen or a green screen and let them see themselves on a television monitor with whatever fantasy landscape they wanted behind them. With a little bit of Hollywood magic, we were able to deal with the broken nature of reality and use a bit of fantasy imagineering to fix it, at least as far as how we saw it in our mind's eyes. The year that the movies Deep Impact and Armageddon came out, we researched the threat of Earth being hit by a meteor or asteroid. And we watched scenes from Hollywood blockbusters and scientific documentaries, and then set about learning survival science, discussing how we might survive in shelters, grow food, recycle water, and provide electricity in the event of such a catastrophe. To learn to shoot down prospective meteors, we used a computer game called Green Globs that taught the use of quadratic equations to destroy green spheres in a Cartesian coordinate system, which we said represented the meteors. In this way, students became enthusiastic about learning math because it was suddenly relevant to stopping a real threat. It wasn't algebra, it was ballistics. Let me go into a little greater detail about the Green Globs program. I used Green Globs in my classroom at Hollywood High School's At-Risk Youth Career Academy in the mid-1990s as a way of teaching math and ballistics to students. But please note that I was never a math teacher. I was working with retired Air Force personnel as part of a government-sponsored project to improve math and science to help our armed forces. I found Green Globs to be the best way to motivate my students and really give them an understanding of applied math. But the mission of our students was not to learn equations that, as they so often said, we'll never use when we graduate. The objective was to work in teams to solve a problem of possible meteors and possible missiles from space threatening their country. These threats were represented by the green globs on their radar screen, a Cartesian coordinate system that finally had meaning. We had a big screen with a projector in front of the class representing mission control, and we had a row of computers in the back where team members sat in groups of 2 or 3 trying out quadratic equations from various textbooks to see what effect they would have. When they thought they had a good equation that would knock out the maximum number of meteors or missiles, globs, with a single shot, in their backroom simulations, potentially saving resources and time and ammunition, they would send a hero up to the front to take the shot against the real menace. Each team had a certain budget of shots. The program was wildly successful. Students taught themselves math to cooperate and compete to counter the threat from space. They memorized trigonometric functions and equations for circles and ellipses and point-slope formulas merely because they wanted to be better heroes against the imaginary threat, which could one day be real. We did no teaching of math concepts and no drilling. There was no rote memorization. They simply played the game in this context, and the learning and memorization came naturally. By contextualizing the learning in terms of meaningful fantasy landscapes that have some connection with reality, but are safer than reality, we made serious learning fun. By making the goal mastery of skills in a non-threatening environment where failure is not punished or ridiculed, but is a sign that you are pushing your limits, we took all of the anxiety out of science and math. As an aside, for the purposes of our relational summary model, note what I've just done here. I used my discussion of our readings to launch into a very personal explanation of my particular experiences as a teacher, trying out some ideas I got from literature and some that I came up with myself. In this way, my summary of the literature becomes relational to my life and ideas and opinions. And that's what I want to get from you too. We aren't interested in hearing once again what we already read in the book. We want you to take us on a journey into your past, your present, your experiences, your observations, your experiments, your trials and errors. We want to learn from you. So please do relate what you're reading to your life.